Today, we're going to take a look at this. It's a 1.5 tonne hand-operated chain winch from Vevor, and I have to say, it dragged my sorry derriere out of the doo-doo nicely recently, which was quite uplifting. See what I did there? I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au. New cars cheap, but Australia only. Website. Card. These are not, frankly, the kinds of tools that you would use every day, except perhaps if you're training for CrossFit, because they're quite heavy and they're a little unwieldy. This baby weighs 17 kilos, about half of which is actually in the lifting block itself, and the other half, I guess, is in the chain. Just running through the specs quickly with you, it's rated at 1.5 tonnes. That's the working load limit. It's got 20 feet, which is just over 6 metres of G80 zinc-plated chain, which is a manganese alloy. When you put manganese in steel, it increases the toughness, and obviously the zinc plating gives it a degree of corrosion resistance. Now, I'd had this hand winch at home for months and months and months, and I hadn't had a reason to review it. I can't even remember if Vevor sent it to me or if I bought it. Speaking of which, they're $145 right now. There's a few different configurations. There's a 6-tonne one and a 750 kilo one. This is kind of in the middle at 1,500 kilos. That's a tonne and a half in Australia, and in America, that would be also about a tonne and a half, because a metric tonne and an imperial, like US tonne, are within a bee's dick of each other. If you're a bit hazy about chain size, this chain is 8 millimetres, or it's actually 5/16 of an inch, so it's imperial chain, but the approximate conversion is 8 millimetres. And if you're not familiar with chain, the size of chain is the diameter of the bar from which each link is manufactured. So 8 millimetre bar curved into a link, 8 millimetre chain. This device is pretty idiot-proof as well, I'd have to say, because you can't lower it off the end of the chain because of this ring that's in the other end, so that's nice. There's really only two controls, which would be up and down. I think that's up, although I can't see it from here. Up, neutral, down, okay? The idiot proofing extends to neutral being selectable only if the chain is unloaded. So if you've got weight on the chain, you can't select neutral. You can physically flick it into this location, but the handle will not disengage from the chain and allow the whole thing to free spool under load. You have to unload it first, and then you can select either up or down. So altogether, that seems pretty idiot-proof. You can't use these things on their own, obviously. You need some rigging to go with them, which would be a few slings, maybe a couple of shackles, and that would frankly depend on the job at hand. Now, as I said, I've had this at home for months and months and months, and I didn't have a reason until just the other day. So yes, isn't nature wonderful? We had a series of storms and rain, and most people know around the world that the eucalypt, or gum tree as we call them here in Shitsville, is the pyromaniac's tree, but that's not its only superpower. One of the things it's really good at is getting eaten from the inside by termites, and then they just poop sort of cellulose mud all over the tree, which then becomes, in heavy rain, waterlogged and really heavy and not all that structurally integral anymore, and big branches fall off all over the shop, which is exactly what happened here. A 300, 400, 500, whatever kilo branch just right out the front of my joint. It's the neighbour's tree which overhangs my joint, and the branch came down right on top of the gas main, the water meter, the sewer and the stormwater outlets, which all flow over a cliff right underneath the tree, and that's exactly where this dirty big branch decided to land. So Normally in a situation like this, one might be motivated to use one's vehicle, I suppose, to drag the branch up and away from these things, or even down and away, whatever, depending on the nature of the specific problem. But that wouldn't work in this situation because too much likelihood of rupturing the water main or the gas main or the sewer or the storm water, and who has time? Okay, so I decided instead of doing it with that beard stroking bogan recovery kind of enthusiasm, that I'd use the hand winch, one of which big tricks is it can inch things along. And in fact, that's all it can do. It doesn't matter how hard you work, you're going to be inching whatever along. So to do this safely, I had to winch a big heavy branch up a cliff and over a ledge, and the winch performed brilliantly. I took some shots of it. I'll whip them into the review so you can see what's happening for context. And also, I'll just run through the rigging too, because that's going to make people's heads explode, and I always like doing that. On the branch end, I put a tree protector, like a four-wheel drive recovery tree protector, and I rigged it up as a choker so that it would not slip. And then through the ends of the tree protector, I put a winch extension strap doubled over, and that meant that I didn't need to put a shackle there, which is likely to get hung up as it comes over the ledge and do even more damage, whatever. And then I put that on one end of the hand winch, and at the other end, obviously, you need an anchor because we're going to go, 100% Archimedes on all of this. And if you give me somewhere to stand, I'll try and move the world kind of thing. And in this case, somewhere to stand was the toe ball of my Triton ute. And I know there'll be 100 beard stroking bogans whose heads will just explode because you can't use a toe ball for recovery, to which I would say I wouldn't use a tow ball for a ballistic recovery of a deeply stuck vehicle in mud or sand or something of that nature, like with a snatch strap. But for many other recoveries, a tow ball's just fine, depending on the condition. And for a low load, quote unquote, recovery, lifting operation like this, the tow ball was and is fine, because 500 kilos worth of wood that we're dragging up a hill with a bit of friction, maybe 600 or 700, 800 kilos worth of total load in the rigging. I just put a 2-ton Industro type sling over the tow ball, and it was fine. I chocked the wheels, obviously, of the ute, applied park, made sure the park brake was on, blah, blah, blah. The ute didn't move at all, so the load was pretty low, I'd have to say. And I worked in heavy industry. We had big, heavy things, railway bogies and V16 diesel engines going overhead all day long on cranes and things of this nature, and also in a testing lab where we broke things for fun and profit. So in this context, and you got to make your own decisions about how you do stuff, but in this context, perfectly safe, okay? Nowhere near causing a tow ball to fail. And also rigging it up in this way had very little to no significant elastic strain energy in the system. So what really hurts people when they use the tow ball and the tow hitch for recovery is if any part of that comes separated from the receiver and then is on the receiving end of a whole bunch of elastic strain energy in the rigging. Like if you're using a snatch strap, which has 20% elongation, it might have, I don't know, 4 tons of load, but also this much elongation, like you're connected to a big spring and it's going to launch the thing out at you. And it's this elastic strain energy that does the damage to people and or property when things come unglued. When you use winch extension straps, tree protectors, and I also used a bit of drag chain, so a bit of 8mm drag chain because I just need a bit of extra length, and I used grab hooks at each end of the drag chain to just get me the length I needed between the problem and the anchor. And none of that stuff, the lifting sling, the tree protector, the winch extension strap, the drag chain, or the chain on this baby, have any substantial elastic strain energy. So in the unlikely event that anything did fail, there wasn't going to be that catapult in any case. But nothing failed because the loads were so far below the potential failure limit of the tow bar or the tow ball or the hitch or the shear pin that holds the two together. Experience proved that that was the case. It was perfectly conservative and the way to get that particular job done in my estimation. And I had a vote, and it was democratic, but only one of us voted. So if you'd like to let rip in the comments that I did a dangerous thing, knock yourself out, but I would suggest that not really the case. Now, if you're in the market for something like this, like I said, it's not the kind of tool that you would use every day. It's just not. But it's really useful when you need that sort of, 500, 600, 700 kilos of horizontal effort. And that's essentially what I used it for. It was off the script. I had it lying around. I whipped it out. It did the job brilliantly. Now, how would you apply this to your own life? Well, obviously, for occasional four-wheel drivers who might end up in a moderate sort of recovery situation, you could use it for that. You could roll it out for that. If you just need a few hundred kilos of assistance, it's a pretty conservative way of doing that. You'd need a tree protector and an extension strap and a couple of shackles and things of this nature, and recovery points on the car would be nice, but for low load stuff, the tow ball is going to be fine. Just let's not be doing a Le Mans start style of snatch strap recovery with the tow hitch. Let's just not do that, okay? So the other applications might be track clearance, mightn't they? Because one of the things that upends a lot of people's four-wheel drive adventuring plans is just a rock fall on the track with no plan B, no workaround that you can just, make a little bit of impromptu track around whatever's fallen down. Or if a tree falls down across the track and you've got a little chainsaw and one of these babies, then there's a chance that you can get your trip back on track and you don't have to go to the expense and the hassle of a bull bar and a winch, which is kind of next level stuff. But if you are that blue singlet axle braking four-wheel drive enthusiast, then a bull bar and a winch makes perfect sense and it's the tool for the job. What I'm suggesting is that there's a middle ground between mummies who just take the kids to school in their Prados or something and the hardcore blue singlet axle breaker. In the middle, you've got dudes who just want to take their family camping who might come across a tree across a track or a rock fall, and this baby might help you get out of trouble there. And it also might be good for just dragging your stuck four-wheel drive a car length or so back out of the mud that you knew was a bad idea to drive into, but you did it anyway because you wanted to look like a hero to your family. Now, you could also use it pretty effectively in construction and landscaping. If that's the kind of thing you do, you want to move a rock around in the backyard or something, then it could be good for that. And also for construction, because often in construction, you have to lift heavy things overhead. And there might be a case for something like that, doing that, depending on exactly what it is you do. If you're Curtis from Cutting Edge Engineering, you might use it for fabrication, because if you're reskinning a big bulldozer blade or something of that nature, and it's a bit bent and you can't get the new skin to line up with where you've done the weld prep on the old bit, you can wrap it in a come along like this and then put a block under the bit that you need to press down and crank on the load. You need to be a bit careful with that though, because you are introducing a fair bit of elastic strain energy in the steel that you're pushing down and making it conform to its new shape, or I guess it's probably really its old shape. In any case, you're introducing elastic strain energy, and if the chain breaks, you better be out of the way because something might get thrown at you. So that is a bit dangerous. Moving machine tools, if you've got a lathe or a milling machine or something like that, and you don't really have a lifting appliance in your shed, but you need to get it from here to here, you can put it on pieces of pipe. If you've got a level surface, you can just lift it up slightly, put it on pieces of pipe. And if you need to drag it somewhere, then this is not a bad dragging appliance. One of the best things about these devices is that they give you something an electric winch or hoist will not do, which is the ability to really inch things forward or back. And I used that during my recovery of that broken tree branch, because the branches on top of all those surfaces, I can't see it as it's coming up. So I've got to keep stopping, inching it forward, having a look, and making sure that we're not turning the gas main into a freaking pretzel. So it's really good at that. And it's also really good at inching up a little bit, lowering a bit if you need to, and reconfiguring. Although I didn't do that, it would be easy enough to do that. You can support the thing that you're trying to move in some other way, just tie it to a tree, whatever, and then you can take the load off and you can reconfigure easily in the way that you can't do this stuff with the winch. With a 12-volt winch, it's always got a bit of inertia. It's very hard to inch things precisely up or down. And also with wire rope kind of hoist that you might put on one of these steel beams up here, that's also fraught with over or undershooting at times when you might prefer just to inch things along. Although I'd have to say, overhead, a chain block is probably a better solution than one of these. These are much better at the precise sort of horizontal pull. So, shed logistics generally, in a pinch, you could whip yourself up an A-frame or a tripod and hang it off a tripod, like get 3 big chunks of treated pine, like 150 around diameter, and then just make yourself a tripod, hang this off the center. You might be able to get enough lift to move something that you need to move off the ground, whatever. And then you can get it up on blocks of wood, and maybe you can get some sort of fork under it, whatever, or a lever. So there's that to think about. I'd suggest that one of the things that this thing does, if you want to work out, they're really good at that. It's a lot of gross movement for you for not very much gross movement of the thing that you're trying to move, okay? So what I'm saying is you do a lot of moving and it doesn't do that much. This is kind of the downside of mechanical advantage, I guess. You're trying to move something, in my case, up a cliff that weighs 400 or 500 kilos, and that means you have to do a lot of movement at relatively low load, but it's not a bad workout, I'd have to say. One thing in its favour is that the ratcheting mechanism inside this thing remains fairly well engaged. So when you're pulling like this and then ratcheting back and pulling and ratcheting back, there's not a lot of free play. And that's important because you're already moving a great deal, and the free play is just energy sapping redundancy, and there's not much of that in here. So that's kind of uplifting. You also don't need to suck on vehicle exhaust, which you do if you're going to be using a winch in some situations, right? The other thing about winches, like the thing that people don't pay enough attention to with winches, is that the winch is dependent on the amount of power that the battery can supply, and the battery supply goes downhill pretty quickly if you're doing a lot of winching. You need the engine running, but that will only be a bit of a band-aid. The other thing about winches is that you lose mechanical advantage, like I'm talking about 12-volt winches. You lose mechanical advantage when the cable is on the outer layers of the drum. You only get the rated pull out of a winch when the cable is on the lowest wrap around the drum, and then quite often there's a limitation on how much of that lower wrapping you can use, because you need some wraps of the cable to provide the friction that retains the cable into the winch itself. So where the winch on the front of your four-wheel drive is at its most powerful, it's often its envelope of usefulness at its highest power is greatly restricted for these reasons, because the battery runs out of grunt, and because when you spool the cable in, it wraps up and increases the diameter of effective action of the cable, reducing its mechanical advantage. So there's those kinds of things to consider, and you can't inch them really well either. You only get to rupture the gas main once for it to be kind of a significant thing in your life, and you don't want to do that. I'd suggest it's good at all of those things, this kind of tool, and it's not very expensive. And I guess if you were going to use one all the time, you could buy a much higher quality one. I don't know if that would be a significant advantage for most people. I suspect not, because for the vast majority of us, it's an occasional use tool only. You probably whip it out once every couple of months, and you'd probably buy it for a specific lifting or hauling application. And then you just have it in your shed for the next time a big branch falls out of the tree. It's pretty hard work. On a hot, humid day, if you've got to do that job that I did, it's pretty hard work. But it's a pretty low-key and safe way of getting a job like this done, in the way that standing underneath it with a frickin' chainsaw overhead would not be the slightest bit safe, because if the chainsaw kicks, it's going to clean up your head. And if anything else goes wrong, if the branch slips, it's going to fall towards you. And for all of these reasons, pulling it uphill was the much safer option. Pulling it uphill out of danger where it couldn't damage people or the services was the hardest way to do it in terms of the physical work, but it was also the safest way. And I've been to the emergency department infrequently, and I never want to go there again. So, hey, that's why I did it that way. It is lots of gross movement to achieve your objective. And I had to reset the whole thing once because I ran out of chain. Like I exhausted all of the lifting capacity, had to pull out the chain and just shorten things up generally and reset to get the last couple of meters so that I could hack it up with a chainsaw. And speaking of cutting it up, it's amazing how effective some automotive-specific tools are if you've just got an ounce of improvisation between your ears. My Impact trolley jack worked out really well for manipulating the trunk of this thing and holding it in place while I cut it up with a little tiny Ryobi battery-operated chainsaw. And that little saw is a powerhouse and very easy to manipulate in these sort of non-standard positions as well. So the alternative would be a 16 or 20 inch bar kind of two-stroke chainsaw, which is a much more potentially dangerous appliance, right? So little battery chainsaw did a great job cutting this thing up, and the trolley jack did a great job just holding it in position enough. In fact, I did lose it off the trolley jack once. And the thing you've got to do in this situation is you've got to cross that bridge before it happens. You've got to say, what am I going to do if this thing slips off its support? And the answer is step away from it and just make sure the saw doesn't hit me, okay? The beauty of having a little saw that's battery operated is it doesn't have a great deal of inertia. So when you take your finger off the switch, it stops rapidly. There's not a lot of chain moving or any of that stuff, and you can use it one-handed. So when it slipped, I was actually using it out here, so I was out of the plane of rotation of the chain. It slipped, I just pushed myself backwards, and it was perfectly safe. I think the thing that hurts people is they get themselves in the heat of the moment into these positions which are intrinsically dangerous, you know, in line with the blade, where if something slips, it's going to push the saw into them or it's going to hit them, and they don't have a plan B. And they're also working in a cluttered environment with a lot of tripping hazards. You don't want to step back into a tripping hazard with a big heavy chainsaw running, because that could end in the emergency department and you could be having a consultation with a vascular surgeon or a neurologist, and that's never fun. So anyway, I think it was nature 0, humanity 1 for the win after this. And the hand winch worked really well. I'm not sure about its longevity, but for occasional use, this thing's going to last me years. And I'm very glad I had it in that particular situation. So I hope this has helped you out. Anyway, it's out of the box. It just works and it's easy. You don't need particular training, but you do need to think really hard at all times about not hurting yourself. So my advice, having worked in industry where they lifted things around all the time, is don't get under anything heavy. And in the context of doing this kind of thing around home, it means don't get in the path of it if it comes unglued. So from the point of view of the support using the vehicle, I put a bit of load on it and then I looked at the vehicle and made sure it wasn't inching itself back towards me. And it was rock solid, so I knew I was good to go there. And then I just wouldn't get underneath it so that if it did fall, the load can't hit you. If the load hits the water main, that's one thing, dude, but if it hits you, that's a disaster. So don't go anywhere near that. And if you have to go anywhere near it, make sure you've got an auxiliary support, like another sling where that thing is tied off to a separate anchor, like a tree, whatever, so that it cannot possibly slip and put you in the emergency department, because you can't see the amount of acquired energy in a heavy thing that's being dragged up a slope. But you sure as shit will feel it if it comes unglued. If you've got to get yourself out of any of these kinds of dramas that crop up from time to time, the Vevor hand winch is not a bad product. It's extremely good value. It worked flawlessly, and I store it in a bucket. It's way out the back. I dust it off if I need it, and for $145, that's a pretty good deal.